After detailed detective work, experts now believe this is the only surviving piece of clothing worn by Elizabeth I.
For centuries, Queen Elizabeth I's tomb at Westminster Abbey has remained sealed, her secrets locked beneath stone. But now, advanced AI claims to have virtually reconstructed her entire genome, and what it uncovered challenges the legend built around England's most guarded monarch.
Elizabeth I, she regularly tops those polls as the greatest English monarch, but should she be there?
A hidden biological clue suggests the Virgin Queen may not have been the figure history has sworn she was.
It's the kind of court that might well generate rumours. Obviously, Elizabeth ought to get married, so why isn't she getting married?
Could her reign have stood on a truth no one dared to voice?
She was unafraid to silence and spill a lot of blood to protect her crown and expand her realm.
AI just decoded Elizabeth I's DNA, and what it found inside her body is nothing short of shocking. The death of the Virgin Queen. On the morning of March 24th, 1603, the reign of one of England's most iconic monarchs came to a quiet end inside the chambers of Richmond Palace. Queen Elizabeth I, who had ruled for 45 years, passed away surrounded by only a few loyal attendants. There was no grand scene or dramatic farewell. Those who were there said she slipped away peacefully after days of refusing food, medicine, or rest. She had become too weak to stand and too weary to speak. For months leading up to her death, her courtiers had been deeply worried. She had stopped sleeping in a bed, choosing instead to sit on cushions or stand for long hours, lost in thought. Her doctors begged her to eat and rest, but she waved them off. Elizabeth had always been strong-willed and proud. To her, giving in to sickness was a sign of weakness. When her body began to fail, she resisted help the same way she had resisted pressure to marry or surrender her crown. When she finally passed, her exact cause of death remained a mystery. No autopsy was ever performed, and medical science at the time was too limited to offer real answers. Some historians believe she may have suffered from pneumonia or a form of blood poisoning. Others suggest cancer, which could explain the fatigue, swelling, and pain she endured in her final months. And then there is the persistent theory of lead poisoning from her makeup, which may have slowly damaged her organs over decades. Witnesses described her final moments as calm but heavy with emotion. The courtiers who had feared her temper now wept openly. News of her death spread across England by horseback, marking the end of the Tudor dynasty. Her cousin, James VI of Scotland, was named her successor, uniting England and Scotland under one crown. To those who had lived through her reign, it was almost impossible to imagine England without her. The Virgin Queen had outlasted every rival, every rebellion, and every storm until her body, worn down by age and burden, finally gave out at Richmond Palace. The burial at Westminster Abbey. When Queen Elizabeth I passed on, England went into mourning. Her body was first taken to Whitehall Palace, where it lay in state for weeks, so nobles and citizens could pay their final respects. Contemporary reports describe her coffin covered in black velvet, surrounded by flickering candles and guarded night and day by her loyal yeomen. Above it rested an effigy of Elizabeth dressed in her royal robes, holding a scepter and orb, symbols of her long and powerful rule. Her funeral took place on April 28, 1603. It was one of the grandest processions London had ever seen. Thousands gathered along the streets as the sound of drums, trumpets, and church bells echoed through the air. The coffin was drawn by 4 horses draped in black cloth, followed by nobles, bishops, and courtiers dressed in mourning. Eyewitnesses wrote that the crowd wept openly, calling out her name as the procession passed to the people. This was not just the death of a queen, but the end of the Tudor age. Elizabeth was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, in the north aisle of the Henry VII Chapel. This was the final resting place of kings, queens, and some of the most important figures in English history. In a symbolic decision, she was buried directly above the coffin of her half-sister, Mary I, the same sister who had once imprisoned her years earlier during their struggle for power. The inscription on their shared tomb reads, "Partners both in throne and grave," a striking reminder of how history can unite even those who were divided in life. The tomb itself remains one of the most visited spots in Westminster Abbey. Carved marble angels and royal symbols surround it, with Elizabeth's figure resting peacefully in stone. Over the centuries, her coffin has never been officially opened. The Abbey guards and historians have chosen to preserve her resting place exactly as it was left, out of respect and tradition. But beneath those centuries-old stones lies not only her body, but the final chapter of the Tudor dynasty, untouched since the day it was sealed. early theories about her health. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Queen Elizabeth I had become more than just a historical figure. She was a legend. Generations later, her sharp intellect, fiery temper, and mysterious death still fascinated scholars and physicians. With no autopsy ever performed, her true cause of death remained a blank space in the pages of history, and the medical minds of later centuries tried to fill it using what they knew from her portraits, letters, and the accounts of those who had served her. In the 1700s, early medical writers began linking her health issues to the intense stress of ruling for nearly half a century. They believed her long reign, filled with political pressure and personal loss, might have slowly broken down her body. Living through wars, betrayals, and constant plots against her life could have easily caused chronic anxiety, which doctors of that time saw as a physical illness that could drain the spirit and weaken the heart. As medicine advanced in the 1800s, new theories appeared. Some Victorian physicians suggested she might have suffered from throat cancer, an idea based on reports that her speech grew weaker in her final months. Others believed she could have had pneumonia or blood poisoning, both common and often deadly in the 16th century. Still, the most talked about theory was the possibility of lead poisoning. Researchers of that era had started studying the toxic effects of heavy metals, and when they learned about the ingredients in Elizabeth's famous white makeup, the dots began to connect. Venetian ceruse, her signature cosmetic, was made with white lead, which scientists later confirmed could cause serious health problems over time. Writers of the 19th century also analyzed her famously pale complexion and swollen hands, seeing them as signs of chemical exposure rather than simple aging. Her tomb had never been opened, and no medical samples could be tested. Each new generation of scholars tried to diagnose the mystery of her decline, not just to solve a medical puzzle, but to understand the human behind the crown. The rise of forensic science. The 20th century brought a revolution in the way we could study human history. For the first time, scientists had tools that went far beyond the written record or skeletal observations. Forensic anthropology began to develop, allowing experts to examine bones and remains in detail to determine age, health, and sometimes cause of death. At the same time, DNA science emerged, offering the possibility of peering into a person's genetic makeup hundreds or even thousands of years after they had lived. These advances opened the door to questions that had long fascinated historians. What diseases did famous figures suffer from? What were their true physical traits, and what secrets might their bodies hold? Researchers could extract tiny fragments of DNA from bones or teeth, sequence them, and sometimes reconstruct aspects of appearance or ancestry. By comparing genetic markers with modern relatives, it became possible to verify identities or clarify family relationships, a task that had been impossible in earlier centuries. Despite these scientific breakthroughs, royal tombs remained largely off-limits. Historic monarchs were buried in places like Westminster Abbey or St. George's Chapel, which are considered national treasures. Ethics and heritage protection laws meant that disturbing these tombs was rarely allowed, even in the name of science. Scholars recognized that while the technology existed to analyze centuries-old remains, the moral and cultural implications of opening a royal coffin were enormous. These sites were not just graves, they were symbols of national history and continuity, and any attempt to investigate them risked public outcry and legal challenges. Even without direct access to royal tombs, forensic science found ways to advance. Scientists began testing less sensitive sites, including non-royal burials or archaeological finds, to refine methods for DNA extraction and analysis. This work laid the foundation for later breakthroughs, such as the identification of King Richard III's remains in Leicester. These successes showed that under the right conditions, even centuries-old DNA could survive long enough to tell a story. By the mid-20th century, forensic science had grown into a mix of biology, archaeology, and detective work. DNA success with other monarchs. In the year 2012, the world of historical science witnessed a major discovery. Archaeologists and geneticists confirmed the identity of King Richard III, the last English king to die in battle, using DNA extracted from his skeletal remains. His body had been buried in a simple grave beneath a car park in Leicester for more than 500 years, forgotten by history until modern science brought him back into focus. Researchers compared DNA from the bones to living descendants on the maternal line and found a match, proving without doubt that the skeleton belonged to Richard. This breakthrough was extraordinary because it showed that DNA could survive for centuries under the right conditions. Even bones buried deep in the ground, exposed to the elements, or handled by many people over time, could still hold genetic clues. Scientists learned more than just his identity. Analysis of Richard's skeleton revealed details about his health, his scoliosis, and even the injuries he suffered during his final battle. It became a powerful example of how science can turn a forgotten figure into someone who speaks through biology. The success with Richard III immediately raised new questions about other famous monarchs. If DNA could be recovered from a king buried in an ordinary grave, what about royals laid to rest in grand tombs, like Queen Elizabeth I? Could modern technology and careful extraction methods uncover her genetic makeup, hereditary traits, or even possible illnesses? AI joins the genetic revolution. Artificial intelligence has quickly become one of the strongest tools in modern genetics. In the early 2020s, scientists began using it to study damaged DNA from remains that are centuries old. Instead of struggling with broken fragments, AI can examine what is left and predict the pieces that time has erased. This could even help rebuild a genome as significant as that of Elizabeth I. AI also helps estimate physical features by reading surviving genetic markers. It can suggest likely hair color, eye color, and hints of facial structure, giving a more realistic picture than the portraits painted during Elizabeth's life. It can even detect signs of hereditary illnesses hidden within partial DNA, offering new clues about her declining health in her final years. These advances have turned genetics into a field that not only studies the past, but actively reconstructs it. Although AI cannot create information that does not exist, it can make accurate predictions based on existing data. If this technology were ever used fully on Elizabeth's remains, it might produce the most detailed and scientifically grounded portrait of her that history has ever seen. Digital reconstruction of Tudor health. In recent years, historians and scientists have teamed up to better understand the health of people living during the Tudor era. Using verified historical records, including letters, medical notes, and household accounts, researchers have created digital models that simulate what life was like for figures like Queen Elizabeth I. These reconstructions go beyond simple speculation. They take into account the foods people ate, the medicines they used, and the living conditions that affected their overall health. Diet during Elizabethan times was often rich in protein for the wealthy, with plenty of meat, fish, and pastries, but it lacked many vitamins and fresh vegetables. Meals were heavily salted or preserved, which could lead to digestive issues and other long-term health problems. Sugar was a luxury that came with its own consequences, contributing to dental decay and poor overall nutrition. These factors, combined with a high-pressure life, would have taken a serious toll on anyone's body, even a queen. Medicine during the period was primitive by today's standards. Treatments often included herbal remedies, purges, and bloodletting, which sometimes caused more harm than good. Physicians relied on theories like the balance of the four humors, and they had no knowledge of germs or bacteria. Even routine illnesses could become life-threatening because medical interventions were not effective. One of the more surprising insights from these models is the extent of heavy metal exposure. Wealthy Elizabethans, including the Queen, commonly used cosmetics containing lead or mercury to achieve the pale, fashionable look of the time. Lead-based face powders, hair dyes, and even utensils made from pewter could all contribute to chronic poisoning over the years. Digital reconstructions suggest that the combination of diet, environmental factors, and cosmetic use would have left subtle but persistent damage to organs, bones, and overall vitality. By combining historical documentation with modern computational tools, these studies provide a detailed and realistic picture of Tudor health. They show that Elizabeth and her contemporaries were constantly managing a delicate balance between the expectations of royal life and the hidden dangers of their environment. While we may never fully know the specifics of her health, these digital reconstructions bring us closer than ever to understanding the daily realities of living as a Tudor monarch. Lead and mercury poisoning theories. One of the more widely discussed theories about Queen Elizabeth I's health focuses on the makeup she famously wore. She was known for her signature pale complexion, which she maintained with a cosmetic called Venetian ceruse. This was essentially a mixture of white lead and vinegar, applied thickly to the face and neck to achieve that smooth, porcelain look that was considered fashionable in the Tudor court. While it gave her the appearance of eternal youth, the substance was highly toxic. Scientists today know that chronic exposure to lead can have serious long-term effects on the body. It can cause fatigue, muscle weakness, joint pain, and even neurological problems. Over time, it can damage the kidneys and other vital organs. Historical descriptions of Elizabeth's later years show signs that are consistent with lead poisoning. Her skin appeared pale and waxy, her hands were sometimes swollen, and she suffered from bouts of exhaustion and lethargy. These symptoms may have been subtle at first, slowly worsening over decades as she continued to use the cosmetic daily. Mercury exposure may also have contributed to her health issues. Like lead, mercury was common in some of the beauty products used by Tudor women, including hair treatments and face creams. Chronic mercury exposure can lead to tremors, mood swings, digestive problems, and cognitive difficulties. Combined with the stress of ruling a kingdom, these toxins could have magnified the physical and mental toll on the queen. Interestingly, these substances were not only in cosmetics. Some utensils, dishes, and even medicines contained traces of lead and mercury, meaning exposure could have been nearly constant. Researchers studying historical Tudor practices note that what was considered fashionable or medicinal at the time would now be recognized as dangerously toxic. While we can't test Elizabeth's body directly, her symptoms and lifestyle choices align closely with the known effects of heavy metal poisoning. Modern science gives us the tools to look back and understand how beauty standards, combined with lack of medical knowledge, could silently undermine even the most powerful monarch. In this way, Venetian ceruse and other substances of the era may have been an invisible adversary, slowly affecting her health while the court admired her radiant, pale face. Hypothetical DNA findings based on context. If scientists were ever able to analyze Queen Elizabeth I's DNA, there's a lot they could potentially uncover about her health and ancestry. One area of interest would be traces of toxic metals like lead, mercury, or arsenic. These substances were commonly used in Tudor cosmetics, medicines, and even utensils. DNA and other tissues like bone and keratin can sometimes retain tiny chemical signatures of these toxins, giving researchers clues about chronic exposure over a lifetime. Finding these traces could help explain some of the symptoms she experienced, like fatigue, swelling, and general physical decline in her later years. Another focus would likely be hereditary conditions. Elizabeth's long-standing pallor, occasional weakness, and possible digestive issues could hint at genetic predispositions, such as anemia or other blood-related conditions. With modern techniques, scientists could examine her genome for mutations associated with these disorders. Similarly, they might look for genetic markers that increase the risk of certain cancers, which could align with historical accounts of her health struggles beyond health. DNA could also reveal information about her ancestry and familial traits. Even though Elizabeth had no children, her genetic makeup could provide insight into the Tudor lineage, confirming connections with relatives and helping historians better understand inherited traits and vulnerabilities. Even though this is still just an idea, scientists can make educated guesses based on what is known about her lifestyle, health, and environment. By combining historical records with what modern genetics has taught us, they can build a clear, evidence-based picture of the health issues and challenges she likely faced during her lifetime, even without directly testing her remains. Ancestral clues hidden in her lineage. Queen Elizabeth I came from a lineage that was already a blend of multiple European bloodlines. Her father, Henry VIII, descended from the English Tudors, who themselves had Welsh roots, while her mother, Anne Boleyn, came from a family with French connections. If her DNA were ever analyzed, it would likely reveal this mixture of Welsh, English, and French ancestry, reflecting the complex web of royal marriages designed to strengthen political alliances across Europe. Genetic analysis could also shed light on aspects of Tudor genealogy that have long been debated by historians. For instance, some questions remain about distant cousins, maternal lineage, and the spread of inherited traits within the royal family. By comparing Elizabeth's genetic markers to those of living descendants from related branches of the Tudor line, scientists could confirm or challenge historical family trees. This kind of comparison has already been done successfully in other cases, such as with Richard III, where DNA matched modern relatives to conclusively identify his remains. Beyond confirming relationships, her genetic profile could reveal inherited characteristics that affected her health or appearance. Traits like hair color, eye color, or susceptibility to certain diseases could be traced through her family line. Such findings would give historians and scientists a more detailed understanding of how the Tudor dynasty's genetics influenced its members. Even without direct testing, knowledge of her ancestry allows us to better understand the genetic and cultural background that shaped one of England's most iconic monarchs, providing context to her life, appearance, and the challenges she may have faced. The ethical and legal barriers. Royal tombs in England are treated with the utmost respect, and Queen Elizabeth I's resting place is no exception. Westminster Abbey, where she lies, is not just a burial site, but a protected historical and religious landmark. The Church of England, which oversees the Abbey, has strict rules against opening tombs or disturbing remains, even for scientific purposes. These policies are designed to preserve history and honor the memory of those interred, preventing unnecessary or disrespectful interference. Because of these protections, any attempt to analyze Elizabeth's DNA would face significant hurdles. Royal consent would be essential, likely involving approval from the reigning monarch or government authorities. This ensures that such a study is not only legally permissible, but also culturally sensitive. Academic oversight would also be necessary, with experts in archaeology, genetics, and history collaborating to design research that meets rigorous ethical standards. Transparency is another critical component. Any findings would need to undergo peer review, meaning other scientists would examine the methods and conclusions to confirm their validity. This process prevents false claims or sensationalized results from being accepted as fact. Without such oversight, even the most advanced technology cannot justify disturbing a centuries-old tomb. The real shock behind the claim. Headlines and social media posts often make bold statements, saying that modern technology has uncovered long-lost secrets. The truth is, no verified DNA has ever been taken from Elizabeth's remains. Her tomb at Westminster Abbey has never been opened for scientific study, and there is no peer-reviewed research showing any genetic analysis. These claims are misleading because they mix science and guesswork and present it as fact. AI can help geneticists, but it cannot create DNA from nothing. To reconstruct a genome, scientists first need actual DNA samples. Since Elizabeth's remains have never been tested, any claim that her DNA has been decoded is not true. The real story is still fascinating. Historical records, letters, eyewitness accounts, and portraits give a clear picture of her life, her health, and her personality. Modern science can also help us understand the Tudor era, including diet, diseases, and environmental factors, which explains some of the health challenges she faced. In the future, AI and genetics may allow more detailed studies of historical figures, but only with proper permissions, strict ethics, and verified methods. For now, our understanding of Queen Elizabeth I comes from a mix of documented history and scientific knowledge. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.